Well, in terms of this idea of facing it, I think it is appropriate now to talk about finding Makeba. And this is Alex's second novel, and it deals with a struggling African-American artist, Ben Cressfield, and his marriage to Helen, an African-American woman, and their daughter, Makeba. Under complex circumstances, Ben leaves his marriage, and when Helen disappears with Makeba, he loses contact with his daughter and never again contacts her until one day when, at a book signing, Makeba shows up bearing a journal which she gives to Ben. Years ago, Alex did a performance piece for children called For Children with Missing Fathers. And Finding Makeba confronts this painful rupture of the parent-child bond. In the opening chapter, Makeba also hands Ben a letter, part of which reads, "My life has brought me to this moment where I need to talk to you. I need to hear your voice. No matter how hard I have tried to completely push you out of my mind, I have to admit that I still have a hole in me. Maybe I did need to know why it all happened. Maybe I needed to tell you that no matter how you tell me this story, it could never adequately explain away the most important fact. You left me." This letter hits the reader hard, right in the chest, and as I was reading this novel this week, I was so taken aback by the way the writing confronts the pain and heartbreak of Makeba, as well as Ben and Helen. In my intro, I talked about the false guilts and stereotypes that are placed upon African Americans and other people of color in a society infected by racism, and how in your art you examine the burdens, the psychic weight of those psychic guilts. But Finding Makeba doesn't shy away also from Ben's very true and real guilt. He did not seek out to find Makeba. She sought him. I know the opening in Makeba's journals came after the portions of the book that explore Ben's relationship with Helen. It strikes me that you needed to confront these issues within this book if you were to grow as an artist. And what's more, in a way, this book cleared the way for all the work that came after this, including The Innocent Classroom. So can you talk a bit about the difficulties of writing this novel and confronting the issues it brings up?
This is the problem with having a friend do this.
Sorry.
That book was very difficult for me to write. But again, I mean, I think I took my mark from you and the courage that you always use to address sexuality and the Asian American male identity. But I think it could be summarized this way. I did write that book, and it was at first a long plaint, like a meditation on my loss, on what I felt like, and my guilt. And I think in order to pursue innocence, which I didn't know that's what I was doing, but I think you have to itemize, you have to inventory all the things that you've done as a way of clearing out all the crap that people are putting on you that you did not do. You have to face what you are culpable for and make amends, or at least that's one of the things about the Million Man March I thought was valid. It's like you have to accept where you've been weak, and then you have to recover from that. But it also it should bolster you against all the stereotypes and negative things that are being placed on you by the culture. Well, I wrote that book, and I remember being at the Walker Art Center while I was almost done, at the point where I was almost done, and somebody this couple walked up to me, and the brother who I don't remember, said, "This is the guy who's writing that book about reuniting with his daughter." And I looked at him, and he said, tell her the story." And I said, "Well, I'm writing a book about a guy who's reuniting with his daughter." He said, no, you have to tell her the whole story. Tell her. So I didn't know her or him at that point. And so I start talking, and almost like 30 seconds into my explanation, she starts crying. And she says, "My dad doesn't care about me." And I'm like, no, I think part of the book is about how men are prevented from expressing their loss about the children they're separated from. Because the loss of a child is the loss of a child. Like male, female, it doesn't really matter. If you are not with your child, you may be partying and having a good old time, but you are not disconnected from that knowledge. That knowledge can never be completely erased. And so I said, no, I'm really trying to give full voice to that, but I guarantee you, your dad may not know how, he may never say, he may never express it, but he has never forgotten you. And so I'm looking at the guy like he's gone. He's getting drinks. And I'm like, come back and get your But I got home that night and I decided the book could not go the way it was. Her voice had to be there. Like it couldn't just be a father's voice. I mean, it could be, but it wasn't right. And so I alternated, so it became a book inside a book inside of a book, in which for every chapter, Makeba at that point says, when she meets Ben, she says, yes, I'm your daughter, and here, I've read your book, and here's my book that responds to your book. And both of those pieces are in that book. And normally when I'm teaching writers, I'm like, stay away from writing outside your gender. So you'll have to be a judge of that for yourself if you read it.
And when the book came out, what was the reaction to it from African American men and African American women?
Has anybody heard of this book before I just started talking about it? Do you really need to ask that question? Essence Magazine, yes, said this is a book every African American woman should have on her bookshelf. It got good reviews. But why am I not who you said you thought I should be? Because the media, because the publishers, because the critics, because the academy, because of all of that really don't give a crap about what a black man is talking about if he's not talking about killing somebody.
But I know there were black men who came up to you and said that book was important.
I would go, all right, thank you. I see, I didn't know where you were going. You should have been. When I was on book tour, I'd be in situations in a bookstore where I'm reading, and I'd see these brothers starting to line up in the back. A lot of them homeless brothers. And they would come up after, they would say, I know, I understand what you're saying. You got me right there. And I came away from that book tour realizing there's so many black men in this country who felt like their separation from their families was a noble gesture. They knew they couldn't do what they needed to do to be successful and responsible, and they bailed. And whether that's good or bad, right or wrong, that was how they felt. And so it was like a lot of these guys were truly homeless guys. And that's why they were homeless. They had left the whole expectation thing behind because they were on drugs, or most of it I think is probably drugs or PTSD or all kinds of other kind of things that would keep them from being fathers, and they ran. That's what I learned. I mean, that was real. That was a very sad, the book is kind of sad, although there is this reunion and a reunification, father and daughter. And also, as you know, halfway through writing this book, my daughter, who I was separated from, found me in a bookstore. This is after I wrote the story. I mean, she walked in a bookstore with her boyfriend and saw my book, Losing Absalom, on the bookshelf, and he said, "Is that your dad?" And that began a brand new relationship with my daughter, with my family, actually. So, I mean, if, from a writing standpoint, writing heals, writing makes connections. I think you can will things into being.
Mm-hmm.